Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks. It was one of those bitter January days when winter feels endless. I was 12 years old, sitting in Mrs. Dawson's math class at Mill Creek Middle School. I struggled to pay attention as she explained long division on the chalkboard. Outside, the blizzard had already swallowed most of the world. The windows rattled as the wind clawed at them, loud enough to drown out even the hum of the classroom heater. I remember the chalk dust drifting in the air as she spoke. Her calm, steady voice was a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. Every few minutes, I glanced at the window, watching the snow swirl and wondering if Dad was okay. He drove the county's snowplows, and storms like this were the worst. Constant accidents, icy roads, and no guarantees. I tried not to let my mind linger on the danger, but it was always there like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Then it happened. A knock at the door. It wasn't the kind of knock you ignore. It was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the routine hum of the day like a knife. Everyone stopped. Even Mrs. Dawson paused. Her chalk hovered midair as she turned toward the door. The room fell so silent that I could hear my own breathing. It was shallow and fast, and my stomach tightened with an inexplicable sense of dread. When she opened the door, the man standing there didn't look like anyone I'd seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy coat dusted with snow. A hat was pulled low over his face. The little I could see of his features, his jaw and his eyes, set my nerves on edge. He didn't look angry or rushed exactly, but there was a stiffness to him, like someone trying too hard to appear calm. His eyes scanned the room quickly, too quickly, before landing on me. "I'm here for Clara Wells," he said. "Her father's been in an accident." My breath hitched. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Just the word accident made my chest feel like it was caving in. Dad. It had to be him. My mind raced, picturing the worst, his truck overturned in a ditch, trapped in the freezing cold. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as the man took a step forward. His boots left wet prints on the tile. "He's at St. Luke's Hospital," he continued. "He asked for Clara, said there wasn't any time to waste." Mrs. Dawson hesitated. Her hands tightened on the door frame, and her face scrunched into a frown, like she didn't fully believe him. "Did he send you?" "Yes," the man replied, nodding quickly, almost too quickly. "I'm a friend of his. He told me to come straight here." I felt everyone's eyes on me as Mrs. Dawson turned and gave me a small, hesitant nod. My legs felt shaky as I stood, grabbed my coat, and followed the man out into the storm. The second we stepped outside, the cold hit me like a slap. The wind was relentless, whipping snow against my face and tearing through my coat like it wasn't even there. His car was parked just a few feet away, an old, dented sedan half buried in snowdrifts. He opened the passenger door for me. His gloved hand was firm on my shoulder as he guided me in. The inside of the car wasn't any better. It was stale. The air was thick with the faint smell of gasoline and damp upholstery. The seats were cracked, and the heater sputtered weakly, barely cutting through the cold. He started the engine without a word, and we pulled away from the curb. The tires crunched over snow and ice. At first, I didn't think much of the route. The storm was so heavy that I could barely make out the road through the windshield. But after a few minutes, I started noticing things. The street lights disappeared. The familiar houses and storefronts gave way to trees, their branches heavy with snow. The car was moving too fast, faster than anyone should be driving in weather like this. "This isn't the way to St. Luke's," I said. "It's a shortcut," he replied curtly, his eyes fixed on the road. I stared at him. My heart pounded. Dad always said there were no shortcuts in storms like this, just slower, safer ways. Something was wrong. Terribly, obviously wrong. But I didn't know what to do. My hands gripped the edges of the seat so tightly that my fingers ached. "You sure?" I asked. My voice was barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened. "Listen," he snapped. "Your dad's in critical condition. You want to waste time arguing, or do you want to see him?" His words stung. For a moment, I felt like I was the one in the wrong. But the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. If anything, it got tighter. The trees pressed closer on either side of the road, their dark shapes looming like silent witnesses. I realized I didn't recognize anything around me. We weren't just lost, we were somewhere I'd never been before. We finally stopped in front of an old building, a lodge that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The wood was rotting. The windows were boarded up, and the whole structure seemed to sag under the weight of the snow. I sat frozen in my seat, staring at it. My breath fogged up the window. He barked. His voice had lost the last shred of civility it had. I hesitated, gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then he was at my door. He yanked it open and grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron as he dragged me toward the building. The snow swallowed my boots with every step. Inside, the air was colder than I'd expected. It smelled like mildew and rust with a sharp metallic tang that made my stomach churn. A single lantern sat on a rickety table in the middle of the room, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The floor was scuffed and scratched. The walls were lined with old shelves and tools, most of them rusted beyond use. "Sit," he ordered, shoving me toward a chair. When I didn't move fast enough, he grabbed a length of rope and tied me down. His movements were calm and methodical, like this wasn't his first time. I tried to stay still, but my hands were shaking so badly that the rope scraped against my skin. "You're going to write a note," he said, tossing a pen and paper onto the table in front of me. "Tell your dad to do exactly what I say, or he'll regret it." What happened next felt like a blur. Writing the note, the sound of him leaving, the silence that followed. I tested the ropes, twisting and pulling until they started to give way. When I finally broke free, I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and smashed the nearest window. The storm outside was deafening, but I didn't hesitate. I climbed out. The glass cut into my hands and knees, and I ran. The cold was unforgiving. It tore at my face and filled my lungs with ice. The forest was a maze of snow and shadows. Every step felt like a battle, but I kept going. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath formed clouds in the frozen air. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stop. When the headlights appeared through the storm, I thought I was imagining them, but they were real. A deputy stepped out of the car. His flashlight cut through the snow, and I collapsed into his arms. Between sobs and chattering teeth, I told him everything. The manhunt lasted 2 days. They found the lodge, abandoned. The kidnapper was found a few miles away, hiding in an old barn. His name was Eric Landry, a former county employee who blamed my dad for losing his job. The ransom note wasn't about money. It was revenge. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory. Snowstorms always bring it back. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I still hear that knock on the door. I was 19 when I first stumbled into competitive gaming. At the time, I didn't even realize what I was getting into. For me, it was just a distraction, a way to escape the monotony of school, work, and figuring out what I was supposed to do with my life. Back then, I wasn't some hardcore gamer. I wasn't the kid staying up all night grinding levels or perfecting my aim. I was just curious. But it didn't take long for curiosity to turn into obsession. What got me hooked wasn't just the games themselves, though. Sure, the strategy, the adrenaline, the rush of beating opponents, that was all great. But what really drew me in was the connection. The way you could log in and suddenly you weren't just some random person sitting in your bedroom anymore. You were part of something bigger. A team, a squad, a family even. It didn't matter where anyone came from, what they looked like, or how much money they made. For those few hours, we were all just voices in a headset, working together toward a common goal. By the time I hit 27, gaming wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was part of who I was. And my game of choice? Killzone Syndicate. If you've never played it, it's hard to explain the appeal. It wasn't just another shooter. It was tactical, demanding, and brutal. Every decision mattered. Every move could make or break a match. You couldn't just run in guns blazing and hope for the best. You had to think, plan, adapt. And I loved that. It felt like chess, but with explosions and headshots. Over the years, I bounced between squads trying to find the right fit. Some were too casual, others too competitive. There was always drama, someone accusing someone else of cheating, cliques forming, egos clashing. It got exhausting. For a while, I considered quitting altogether. But then I found the Crimson Wolves. From the moment I joined, I knew they were different. Vic and Mara, the couple who ran the squad, had this way of making everyone feel welcome. They were older. Vic was 44, Mara a few years younger. But they didn't act like the stereotypical elders of the group. They were just chill, down-to-earth people who genuinely loved gaming and cared about their team. There was no drama, no ego trips. Everyone had a role, and everyone respected each other. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. And then there was Dagger. She was the kind of player you didn't forget. Sharp, fearless, and wickedly talented. Her aim was so precise it felt almost inhuman at times. And her strategies? Bold didn't even begin to cover it. She'd make plays no one else would dare try. 9 times out of 10, they worked. But it wasn't just her skills that stood out. It was her personality. She had this dry, cutting humor that could make you laugh even when you were losing. She was the heart of the squad, in a way. Everyone loved her. Over time, Dagger and I started talking more. At first, it was just the usual banter during matches. But then we started messaging outside of the game. It was easy to talk to her. Too easy, maybe. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. Like what you said actually mattered. We'd stay up late talking about everything. Family, work, life. Looking back, I realized I was leaning on her more than I should have. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I thought we were just friends. Then January came. Everything fell apart. It was a freezing night, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you're wearing. Lena, my wife of 8 years, asked me to sit down. She looked distant, like she wasn't really there. Her hands were shaking as she smoothed the blanket over her lap. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. "Do what?" I asked, still half smiling. "This," she said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "Us. I need to figure out who I am. I need space." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. We'd been through so much together. Moving into our first crappy apartment, saving up for a house, bringing our daughter Ellie into the world. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. Or so I thought. Now she was leaving? Just like that? The worst part came next. She wanted full custody of Ellie. "It's not forever," she said quickly, like that would somehow make it better. "Just until I get my footing." My footing. Like I was supposed to be okay with seeing my little girl only on weekends or holidays. Like I could just turn off the part of me that needed to be there for her bedtime stories and her giggles and her little daddy, watch this moments. I didn't know how to handle it. I retreated into gaming, the one thing that still made sense. The Crimson Wolves noticed something was off right away. Vic and Mara offered kind words, but they didn't push. Dagger, though, pushed. Hard. She started messaging me constantly, saying she understood what I was going through. She shared how she'd lost her brother a few years back, how grief had almost consumed her. At first, her messages were a comfort, but then they started to change. It wasn't just the volume, though God knows there were a lot of messages. It was the tone. If I didn't reply within a certain amount of time, she'd send follow-ups. "Did I upset you? Are you okay? You can tell me if you're mad." It was relentless. Then she sent me a friend request on social media. I hesitated but eventually accepted. That was mistake number 1. Once she had access to my profile, it got worse. She liked every post I made, commented on everything, even old photos from years ago. She started tagging me in these rambling posts about her day, about how grateful she was to have me in her life. If I didn't respond, she'd message me, sometimes apologizing, sometimes accusing me of ignoring her. I felt trapped. Then Lena called me one night, her voice tight with anger. "Who is this Dagger woman?" she demanded. I froze. "How do you know about her?" She messaged me. Lena said, practically spitting the words. She called me a bad mother. She said I didn't deserve you. What the hell is going on? I felt sick. Somehow, Dagger had found Lena's profile and sent her these cruel, vicious messages. I confronted her immediately, telling her she'd crossed the line. She apologized, crying, saying she was just trying to protect me. But when I told her I was blocking her, her tone shifted. "You can't do that," she said. "I need you. You're all I have." I blocked her anyway. For a while, things were quiet. The Crimson Wolves disbanded not long after. It was just too much for everyone. I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. A massive snowstorm hit, trapping me inside for days. It gave me too much time to think. Then one night, during that storm, I was on a Zoom call for work. We were mid-discussion when a new participant joined. The username was gibberish. I thought it was a glitch, until the camera turned on. It was her. Dagger. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Behind her, I could see a frosted window. Snow swirling outside. "Hey," she said softly, her voice brittle. "I missed you." I froze. My coworkers stared, confused. Then she lifted her arm into the frame. The scars were fresh, raw, spelling out my name. "I did this for you," she whispered. The feed cut out. That night I found someone she dated, told him everything. He promised to confront her, but the next morning she found him. She drove her car into him. He survived, but barely. She was arrested and eventually sent to a psychiatric facility. The storm passed, but its weight lingered. I still game sometimes, but I never let anyone in. Some nights when it's quiet, I think of her face on that screen. Her whisper cuts through the silence like a knife. "I did this for you." Some scars never heal. Some obsessions never fade. And some winters, no matter how much time passes, leave you buried in their snow. It was one of those nights when winter seemed determined to make you regret every decision that led to you staying in this part of the country. January, brutal as ever, had unleashed one of its infamous snowstorms, the kind where snow falls so thick and fast, you can barely see a few feet ahead. The wind slices through even the thickest layers like it has a personal vendetta. From my office window, I could see the street lights glowing faintly. Their light was swallowed by the storm. Cars crawled by. Their tires spun uselessly on the ice-slicked roads. It was the kind of night where everyone with sense stayed home, wrapped up in blankets with a hot drink. Not me, though. I was at my desk sipping lukewarm coffee and picking at a crossword puzzle I wasn't really in the mood for. Honestly, business had been slow lately. Painfully slow. My days were spent flipping through old case files, looking for something, anything, that might be worth a second glance. I had even started reorganizing my office just for something to do. So when I heard the knock on my door, I jumped. I spilled coffee onto the crossword and cursed under my breath. It wasn't just that it startled me. It was the time. Past 8. And the storm. Nobody should have been out in that mess unless they absolutely had to be. I stood up, wiping at the coffee stain with the sleeve of my sweater, and headed to the door. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor needing help. A jump start, maybe, or someone stranded in the storm. When I opened the door, though, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. There she was, standing there with snow clinging to her coat, her breath puffed out in little clouds. She was clutching a bag close to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was red from the cold. But it wasn't just the weather. There was something else there. Something that made me pause. Her name, as I'd soon learn, was Lisa. "Are you the investigator?" she asked. Her voice was tight and shaky, like she was one wrong word away from breaking. I nodded, stepping aside. "Yeah, that's me. Come in. You're going to catch your death out there." She hesitated for a moment. Her eyes darted down the hall as if she was checking to make sure she hadn't been followed. Then she stepped inside, bringing with her a gust of frigid air and the faint smell of wet wool. I helped her out of her coat, hung it on the rack by the door, and gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself into the chair across from my desk. She gripped the armrest like she might fall right through the floor if she let go. "I need your help," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Now, I've been in this line of work long enough to recognize the look that usually comes with those words. Hurt, anger, betrayal. But Lisa? She didn't look angry. She looked scared. That was the first thing that told me this wasn't going to be an ordinary case. I leaned forward, grabbing a notepad and pen. "All right, start from the beginning. Why do you think he's cheating?" Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as she spoke. "It's not just little things," she said. "He's been disappearing. Hours at a time, always with some excuse, work, errands, poker with friends. But I know he's lying. I followed him once." Her voice dropped and she glanced toward the window again. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "He goes to this house," she continued. "It's on the outskirts of town. A man lives there. Someone I've never met. I don't know his name." That gave me pause. A man? That wasn't what I'd expected. "And you're sure it's not just, I don't know, a buddy of his?" Lisa shook her head firmly. "He doesn't have friends like that. Not ones he visits alone, and not at that house." Her hands were trembling now, and I could tell she was trying to hold herself together. I didn't push. "Okay," I said gently. "Let's take it one step at a time. Tell me more about the house. What's it look like? How often does he go there?" She described it in detail. A small, squat building at the edge of a wooded lot, with a sagging roof and peeling paint. The kind of place you'd drive past 100 times without giving it a second glance. She told me her husband went there once, sometimes twice a week, always at odd hours. And it's not just the house, she added. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's been acting strange, distant, agitated. And at night he talks in his sleep. Talks in his sleep. I echoed. What does he say? Her face went pale, and she hesitated before answering. Names I don't recognize. And other things. Things that don't make sense. Sometimes it sounds like he's arguing with someone. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I scribbled a few notes, then looked up. Lisa, I'll help you. But I need as much information as you can give me. His routine, his habits, anything that seems off. For the next hour, she told me everything. His schedule, the little inconsistencies she'd noticed, the things he'd said that didn't add up. By the time she left, the storm had gotten worse. I watched from the window as she disappeared into the swirling snow. Her coat pulled tight around her, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be different. The house was exactly as Lisa had described. Unremarkable at first glance, but there was something about it that set my nerves on edge. Maybe it was the way it seemed to sag under the weight of its own secrets, or the fresh tire tracks leading up the driveway, partially obscured by the falling snow. Lisa's husband's car was parked there, its windows fogged from the cold. I parked a block away and waited, watching as he approached the door with his head down, his shoulders hunched against the wind. A man answered, middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. They exchanged a few words before the man stepped aside to let him in. At first, I thought it was nothing, just two guys in a house. But something about it didn't sit right. When I told Lisa, she looked at me like I'd missed something obvious. He doesn't have friends like that, she said. Not once he visits alone. I kept digging. For days I tailed him, keeping a careful record of his movements. The pattern was always the same. Work, errands, the house. But the house, that's where things got strange. Visitors came and went at odd hours. Their comings and goings were barely visible through the storm. They'd hand over cash, receive whispered instructions, and disappear into the back of the house. Whatever was happening there, it wasn't drugs. It wasn't an affair. It was something else. Something darker. The night I decided to go inside, the storm was raging worse than ever. The wind howled through the trees. The snow came down in relentless sheets, muffling every sound except the crunch of my boots on the ice. I approached the house with my heart hammering in my chest. The cold barely registered against the adrenaline coursing through me. At the door, I muttered the password I'd overheard. Driftwood. The man at the door looked me over. His eyes were cold and calculating, but he let me in after I handed over some cash. Inside, the air was stiflingly warm, thick with the stench of bleach and something metallic. He led me down a narrow hallway to a door at the back of the house. My gut screamed at me to turn around, but I forced myself to push forward. The room was a nightmare. Cages lined the walls, filled with animals. Dogs, cats, rabbits, even chickens. The metal table in the center was stained with blood. Its surface was scarred from years of use. Tools hung on the walls. Their sharp edges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. The smell was overwhelming, a sickening mix of blood and cleaning products. My stomach churned, and I fought the urge to run. "What is this?" I managed to ask. My voice was shaking. The man smirked. "What you paid for." I didn't stay to find out what he meant. I bolted, running through the snow until I reached my car. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The raid came the next morning, but it was too late. The cages were empty. The room was scrubbed clean. The man was arrested, but the charges wouldn't stick. Animal cruelty laws were a joke, and he knew it. When I told Lisa, she stared at me. Her face was ashen. Was he involved? She whispered. I showed her the photos I'd taken. "I think he's been paying to be there," I said quietly. She didn't cry. She just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm leaving him," she said. "I don't care what it takes." I didn't try to stop her. The snow melted eventually, but the memory didn't. That room, with its blood-stained table and terrified animals, still haunts me. Some nights I can still smell the bleach. Some scars I think never really heal. Have you ever felt a storm that didn't just chill you but made you feel like the world itself was unraveling? That's the best way I can describe that night. The wind wasn't just cold. It had a bite to it, sharp and unrelenting, like it wanted to carve pieces off you. It screamed as it whipped through the hills, tearing at my face and tugging at my cloak like some furious, invisible hand. Snow fell in relentless, blinding sheets thick enough to erase everything around us. The horizon, the stars, even the ground underfoot. It was all swallowed up in a swirling, endless white void. And yet somehow Mara and I kept moving. We didn't stop. We couldn't stop. There was a fire inside us, hotter than the freezing air. It pushed us forward, step after grueling step. Even when my legs felt like they might give out. Even when the cold had seeped so far into my body that I wasn't sure I could feel my hands anymore. I kept going, because giving up wasn't an option. Not for us. Not that night. The cave we called home wasn't much. It was dark and damp, with a low ceiling that always made me feel like the walls were pressing in, waiting to crush me. But it was shelter. It kept the wind out, usually. That night, though, even the cave felt like it was giving in to the storm. The fire we'd built flickered weakly, struggling against the cold that crept in through every crack and crevice. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into strange, monstrous shapes. I remember staring at them, half expecting them to move on their own. They didn't, but the feeling stayed with me. The sense that something unseen was watching, waiting. The kids were huddled together near the fire, pressed so close to each other you'd think they were trying to melt into one body. Their faces were pale and pinched, their eyes wide and tired. I could see their breath, little white puffs rising and vanishing in the frigid air. They didn't complain, not out loud, but you could see the hunger in their eyes. Hunger that went beyond the gnawing ache in their bellies. It was deeper than that. They were starving for something more. For warmth, for safety, for a life that wasn't this. But they'd grown up in the shadows and the cold. They'd never known anything else. Mara stood near the fire, her back to the wall, her arms crossed. She was watching us, but her expression gave nothing away. Mara was like that, silent, calculating. She didn't waste words. When she spoke, it was always with purpose. Her dark hair clung to her face in damp strands, and her coal black eyes seemed to absorb the flickering light of the fire. I don't think I ever saw her truly afraid. If she was scared, she never showed it. "We're going tonight." Her voice cut through the quiet like a blade. The kids stirred, shifting uneasily. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They knew what it meant when Mara said something like that. They knew what we were, what we did, and they knew that when Mara made up her mind, there was no changing it. "The storm will cover our tracks," she continued. "No one will expect us to be out in this. It's the perfect time." Perfect. That was Mara's word for it. To me, it felt more like madness. But I didn't argue. I never did. Mara was the kind of person you didn't question. You just followed her lead and hoped for the best. By the time we stepped outside, the storm was in full fury. The wind hit me like a wall, knocking the breath right out of my lungs. Snow whipped around us, stinging my face and finding every gap in my clothing. My cloak was soaked through in minutes, heavy and useless. My fingers and toes went numb almost immediately. But I didn't stop. Pain was just part of life. You learned to push through it, or you didn't survive. Mara led the way, moving with a kind of grace that seemed impossible in weather like that. She didn't stumble, didn't falter. Her steps were steady and deliberate, even as the snow rose higher around us. I followed close behind, my eyes fixed on her back. The others trailed behind us, a silent procession of shadows moving through the white void. None of us spoke. The storm was too loud, anyway. Its howling roar drowned out everything else. Our destination was the crossroads, a spot we'd scouted before, where travelers often stopped to rest. It was risky, especially in a storm like this, but we didn't have a choice. Our supplies were almost gone, and desperation makes you do things you wouldn't normally consider. When we reached the crossroads, the storm seemed to intensify, as if it knew what we were planning and wanted to stop us. The wind screamed in my ears, and the snow swirled so thickly that I could barely see a foot in front of me. And then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic crunching sound. Footsteps. My heart started pounding hard and fast. Not fear, exactly. More like anticipation. Excitement even. I glanced at Mara, but she'd already heard it too. Her head tilted slightly, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. And then through the blizzard, they appeared. A man and a woman, bundled in heavy cloaks. They moved slowly, leaning on each other for support, their figures ghostly against the snow. They looked lost, struggling with each step. Easy prey. Mara raised her hand, signaling us to spread out. We moved silently, our footsteps muffled by the snow. The storm was our ally, hiding us, masking our approach. The couple didn't see us until it was too late. Mara struck first. She always did. Her knife flashed in the dim light, and the woman screamed. A sound so raw and primal it sent a shiver down my spine. The man roared in response, his voice thick with rage and fear. He reached under his cloak and pulled out a pistol, firing wildly into the storm. The shot cracked through the night like thunder, and I felt a sharp, burning pain as the bullet grazed my arm. Before I could even react, he drew a sword, swinging it with a ferocity that took me off guard. This wasn't some helpless traveler. This man was a fighter. Mara lunged at him again, her movements quick and deadly, but he met her blade with his own. For a moment, it was like watching a deadly dance. Steel clashing against steel, sparks flying in the darkness. The rest of us joined the fight, but it was chaos. The storm made it nearly impossible to see, and the snow underfoot was slick with ice and blood. I don't even know how long it lasted. Minutes? Seconds? It felt like forever. And then, through the blinding snow, more figures appeared. Travelers drawn by the noise. Too many of them. Mara swore under her breath, her voice sharp with frustration, and gave the signal to retreat. We fled back to the cave, the storm battering us every step of the way. By the time we got there, I was shaking, half frozen, and bleeding. My arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed me, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was how close we'd come to losing everything. But the worst was yet to come. As soon as we stepped into the cave, I heard it. The distant, eerie sound of dogs baying. My stomach dropped. Bloodhounds. And where there were hounds, there were soldiers. The fight in the cave was short and brutal. The soldiers stormed in with torches and swords, their shadows huge and terrifying on the walls. The kids screamed as they were dragged from their hiding spots. Mara fought like a demon, her blade flashing in the firelight, but there were too many of them. They overpowered her, dragging her to the ground and binding her hands. They got me too. They marched us through the storm to the nearest village, where a crowd had already gathered. The villagers shouted and jeered, their faces twisted with hate. Mara was the first to die. They burned her at the stake, and she didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at them, her eyes blazing with defiance. The kids followed, their cries cutting through the howling wind. And me. They left me for last. They cut off my hands and feet, leaving me to bleed out in the snow. The crowd roared as I lay there, staring up at the swirling storm. Before the darkness took me, I smiled. Not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified. But because I wanted them to know something they'd never understand. It isn't over, I whispered. The storm carried my words away, but I didn't care. The snow melts. The shadows, they stay. They always stay. You know how sometimes you look back on your life and think about the moments that changed you? Not the big, obvious ones like graduating or moving away, but the quiet, haunting ones you can't quite shake. For me, it was the snowstorm when I was 15. Even now, I still wonder if what I saw that day was real, or if my imagination got the better of me. But deep down, I know. Our town, Waypoint, sat high in the mountains, where the winters were brutal and unrelenting. Snowstorms were practically a season of their own, whiteouts that turned the world into a swirling, suffocating void. But this storm was worse than most. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows and clawing at the walls. Snow came down so thick that when you looked outside, it felt like you were staring into the static of an old TV. Most people were hunkered down, cozy in their homes with blankets and hot drinks. Not me. I'd never been one for sitting still. Back then, I had this strange obsession with mushrooms. Not the kind you toss into stir-fry, but the rare wild ones, the ones that grew in odd places, like frozen soil or the decaying bark of winter trees. I'd read about species that survived against all odds, pushing through the snow as if to defy nature itself. I thought that was magical in a way, and I wanted to find one. The woods behind our house were my second home. I'd spent entire summers exploring their twisting trails, cataloging every tree, every fallen log, every peculiar nook and cranny. I felt like I knew them better than anyone. But when I stepped outside that day, into the storm, the woods didn't feel like mine anymore. The snow had transformed them into an alien landscape. Every familiar landmark was buried, smoothed over by drifts that turned the ground into a featureless expanse of white. It was like the forest itself had disappeared, swallowed up by the storm. Still, I was determined. I pulled my scarf tighter around my face, slung my satchel over my shoulder, and trudged into the woods. My boots crunched loudly in the snow. I told myself I'd stay close to home, just long enough to see if I could find anything interesting. I didn't realize how quickly the storm would erase my tracks, or how easy it was to lose all sense of direction. At first, I was confident. Even with the snow covering everything, I thought I could rely on my memory to guide me. I recognized the slope of the hill to my left, the faint outline of a tree stump jutting out of the snow. But as I went deeper, the landmarks became harder to spot. The trees grew closer together, their skeletal branches creaking and swaying in the wind. The storm's gray light blurred the edges of everything, making it hard to tell where the ground ended and the sky began. It wasn't long before I realized I was completely and utterly lost. I stopped in my tracks, trying to get my bearings. The woods around me were eerily quiet, except for the constant moan of the wind. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon for anything that might point me back toward home. My scarf, damp from my breath, stuck to my face. My gloves were useless against the cold. A part of me wanted to panic, but I shoved the feeling down. You've been in these woods 100 times. You'll find your way back. Then I saw the railroad tracks. The tracks were ancient remnants of a logging line that hadn't been used in decades. They cut through the woods like a scar, a straight, unbending line that marked the edge of what I knew. On one side was the part of the forest I was familiar with, the part that felt safe. On the other side was something else, the deeper woods, the wild woods. I'd always stayed on the safe side, mostly because of the stories people told. Tales of hunters who went missing, of strange noises in the night, of lights flickering between the trees. The kind of stories that made you laugh nervously when you heard them, but left you lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling. I don't know what possessed me to cross the tracks that day. Maybe it was the storm, the way it made the world feel unreal. Or maybe it was just plain curiosity, that reckless teenage belief that nothing bad could really happen to you. Whatever it was, I stepped over the rusted rails and into the unknown. The air changed immediately. It was colder, sharper, like I'd walked into a different season altogether. The trees were taller here, their gnarled branches twisting together to block out what little light there was. The snow seemed heavier, almost suffocating. Every step sank me deeper into the drifts. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just endless snow and trees. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, something half hidden in the storm. But as I got closer, I realized it was a tent. It stood in a small clearing, sagging under the weight of the snow. The fabric, once bright, was now faded and torn, flapping weakly in the wind. My stomach churned as I stared at it. A tent? Out here? In this storm? It didn't make sense. The closer I got, the worse the smell became. It was sharp and metallic, mixed with something sickly sweet, like meat left out too long. My hand instinctively went to my scarf, pulling it tighter over my nose and mouth. I stopped a few feet away from the tent, unsure of what to do. "Hello?" I called out. My voice cracked. The wind swallowed the word. The clearing stayed silent. The tent's flap hung open, revealing only darkness inside. My chest tightened as I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave. But instead I took a step closer, and another. My curiosity, or maybe my stupidity, won out. I crouched down and peered inside. The sight made my skin crawl. The tent was a mess of scattered clothes, a rusted canteen, and what looked like animal bones. But what made my blood run cold was the knife. It lay in the middle of the tent, its blade jagged and stained dark. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't rust. I scrambled back, nearly falling into the snow. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led away from the tent, deeper into the forest. They were fresh, barely dusted with snow. Whoever had left them wasn't far. I should have turned back then. I should have run. But I told myself, what if they're hurt? What if they need help? So I followed. The tracks wound through the trees, leading me to another clearing. At the center stood a figure. At first, I thought it was a person, their back turned to me. But something about them felt wrong. They were too still, too rigid, like a mannequin left out in the snow. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't move at first. Then slowly it began to sway side to side, like it was being rocked by an invisible wind. My breath hitched, and then it turned. Its face, if you could call it that, was pale and frostbitten, the skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were black pits, empty yet somehow piercing. Its cracked lips moved silently, as if whispering words I couldn't hear. In its hands, it clutched a bundle of bones tied together with string. Human bones. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. Then it lunged. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was sprinting through the snow, my boots slipping and sliding as I pushed myself forward. The trees blurred past me, their branches clawing at my jacket. Behind me, I heard the crunch of snow, the guttural rasp of breath. It was chasing me. When I reached the railroad tracks, I threw myself over them, falling into the snow on the other side. Everything went quiet. I turned back, gasping for air. The figure was gone. No footprints, no shadow. Just empty forest. I made it home somehow, stumbling through the door. My parents didn't laugh when I told them what happened. They called the police, who searched the woods for hours. They found nothing. Not the tent, not the footprints, not the man. Just snow. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. The woods, once my refuge, are now a place I can't bring myself to visit. And every January, when the snow falls and the storm howls, I think of that figure, waiting, watching, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to cross the tracks. Stealth camping always felt like stepping out of the rush of modern life and into something timeless. I don't know. Maybe it's that primal instinct, the need to feel untethered, to strip everything back to the essentials. No rules, no expectations, just you and the wild. For years, Lena and I had perfected the art of disappearing into these hidden corners of the wilderness. It started as a way to save money during road trips. Sure, but somewhere along the way, it became so much more. Our little ritual, our escape. We used to call it invisible living. It sounds cheesy now, but at the time it felt like we discovered some great secret. We'd pack light, find trails that no one cared about, and leave no trace behind. A night or two in the middle of nowhere could feel like weeks of freedom. But there's something I've learned about freedom. It's not always peaceful. Sometimes when you step outside the safe little bubble of civilization, you realize the things out there that you don't want to see. Things you can't unsee. That lesson came on a January night that started off like any other adventure. The snowstorm? That was just part of the challenge, or so we thought. Now looking back, I realize how naive we were. We'd been driving all day, weaving through the back roads of the Appalachian Hills. If you've ever been out there, you'll know what I mean when I say it feels like the kind of place where time forgot to keep moving. Every so often, we'd pass a cluster of houses run down, patched together with tin and plywood, and occasionally a small, lonely gas station with a sagging roof and flickering neon signs. The kind of places where the clerk gives you a suspicious look just for stopping by. The snow had started falling early in the afternoon. At first it was beautiful, those big fluffy flakes that settle softly on the trees and make everything look like a Hallmark Christmas card. Lena was driving, her gloved hands gripping the wheel as the road climbed higher and higher into the hills. The snow thickened with every mile, blurring the landscape until it felt like we were the last two people on Earth. "You think we'll make it before dark?" Lena asked. Her voice was tense but steady. She didn't take her eyes off the road, but I could see her jaw tightening. I looked down at the map spread out across my lap. It was an old one, all creases and faded ink, but we trusted it more than the GPS that had given up on us hours ago. "There's a trail marked about here." I traced a line with my finger. Couple of miles ahead, I think. Lena didn't say anything. She just nodded and kept driving. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the snow, and the road beneath us turned slick and treacherous. By the time we spotted the town, I could feel the tension in the air like static electricity. Calling it a town is generous. It was more like a ghost of a town. A few crumbling buildings huddled together on either side of the road. Their windows were boarded up, and their paint was peeling in long, curling strips. The only sign of life was a diner at the crossroads. Its neon sign buzzed faintly in the falling snow. Even that looked more like a relic than a place where people actually ate. "This is it?" Lena asked, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged. "Trail's just past here, I think." She turned onto a narrow road that branched off behind the diner. The tires crunched through fresh snow. The forest seemed to close in around us almost immediately. The tall, snow-laden trees cast long shadows in the fading light. After a few minutes, we spotted a small, weathered sign marking the trailhead. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "This'll work," Lena said. A grin tugged at the corners of her mouth. She loved this stuff even more than I did, the forgotten places, the sense of finding something no one else cared about. We parked the car and grabbed our packs, starting up the trail without a second thought. The snow fell thick and steady, muffling the world until it felt like we were walking through a dream. Our footsteps crunched softly beneath us, and every breath hung in the air like a ghost. After about an hour of hiking, we found the clearing. It was tucked away in the middle of the forest, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. At first glance, it looked perfect. Then we noticed the shed. It was old, ancient really. The roof had caved in on one side, and the walls leaned at precarious angles, held together more by stubbornness than anything else. Nearby, a rusted gate hung open, barely attached to a crooked wooden fence. Ivy snaked around the fence posts, tangled with snow like nature's version of a crime scene. "This is creepy," Lena said. Her voice was laced with both amusement and unease. "Creepy's good." I tried to sound confident. "Means no one's gonna bother us." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. We set up camp quickly, stringing our hammocks between two sturdy trees and rigging a tarp overhead to keep the snow off. Dinner was quick and simple. Granola bars, some jerky, and lukewarm coffee from a thermos. By the time we climbed into our hammocks, the storm had kicked up, and the wind howled through the clearing like something alive. I pulled my blanket tighter around me and tried to sleep, but the cold seemed to seep into my bones. I don't know how long I dozed, but something woke me. Not the wind, it had quieted by then. It was a sound, a deliberate, measured crunch in the snow. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath, listening. Crunch, crunch. The sound was slow, deliberate, and heavy, too heavy to be an animal. My pulse quickened. "Lena," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She stirred in her hammock, blinking groggily. "What?" she mumbled. "Listen." We both froze, ears straining against the silence. Then we saw her. A woman stumbled through the clearing. She looked half dead. Her hair hung in wild tangles around her face. Her coat flapped open to reveal a thin dress that clung to her frail body. She moved like every step might be her last. Her arms hung limp at her sides. "Help," she croaked, her voice weak and broken. Before we could react, more footsteps shattered the stillness. Two men emerged from the trees. Their figures were hulking and dark against the snow. One of them carried a flashlight. Its beam sliced through the storm as it landed on the woman. "There you are," one of them snarled. His voice dripped with anger. The woman froze, trembling. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I." One of the men grabbed her roughly by the arm, yanking her toward the shed. "Shut it," he barked. "You know the rules." "Rules." That word stuck in my head, cold and sharp like an icicle. "What rules?" The flashlight swung across the clearing. It landed on us. Lena and I didn't move, didn't even breathe. The man stared for a moment, then muttered something to his companion. "Forget it," the other man said. His voice was low but firm. "We've got what we came for." Then they were gone, disappearing into the shed with the woman in tow. Her muffled sobs were the last thing we heard before the storm swallowed them up. We tore down camp in record time. Our hands were shaking so badly we fumbled with every knot. The snow slowed us down, but panic kept us moving. By the time we reached the car, my lungs burned from the cold. Lena was practically throwing herself into the driver's seat. We didn't stop until we were miles away, parked at a gas station with the lights buzzing overhead. The next morning, we reported everything to the local sheriff's office. The deputy listened, nodding with a detached expression, then shrugged. "Probably just locals messing around," he said. "We'll check it out." But we both knew he wouldn't. I still think about that night, about the woman's desperate eyes and the men who dragged her away like it was nothing. I wonder who she was, what she'd done, or hadn't done, to end up in their hands. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she's still out there, if she's waiting for someone to save her, or if she's just another ghost in the snow. You know those nights that sneak up on you, the kind that stick in your chest like a thorn, even years later, no matter how much you try to forget. Yeah, this was one of those. It was mid-January, the dead of winter, and I was out there in a blizzard that felt like it had come straight from some ancient tale about cursed winters. The kind where the cold doesn't just nip at you, it grabs you by the throat and doesn't let go. I was driving an old hatchback, A car that should have retired 10 years ago but kept limping along out of sheer spite. Everything I owned was stuffed into it. Suitcases bursting at the seams, a box of half-burned journals I couldn't bring myself to throw away, and a broken toaster I'd promised myself I'd fix someday. It wasn't just my car that was full, it was my life, crammed into that trunk like a bag I'd overpacked for a trip I didn't even want to take. See, I wasn't out there by choice. I just left the city after what I can only describe as a nuclear-level breakup. 5 years with Kate, and we'd managed to destroy each other in ways I didn't even think were possible. The fights, the screaming, the drinking to forget, it was a slow-motion train wreck. When it was over, I couldn't stay. Every street corner, every cafe, every song on the radio, it all felt like it was mocking me. So I packed up my life, swallowed what was left of my pride, and decided to head back to my hometown, 28, and moving back in with my mom. I told myself it was just temporary. The storm started out innocent enough, just a soft dusting of snow that made everything look like a Christmas card. But within an hour, it turned nasty. The snow came down in thick, relentless sheets, slamming against my windshield like it was trying to blind me. The wind howled, rattling the car like it was trying to peel the roof off. My GPS had rerouted me off the main highway. Something about construction, and I found myself on this narrow back road that twisted and turned like a snake. The road was flanked by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow, arching overhead like they were trying to trap me. My headlights barely made a dent in the darkness, and every so often, the tires would skid just enough to make my heart jump. The heater was wheezing like an asthmatic smoker, and I could feel the cold creeping in through the cracks around the windows. It was the kind of cold that made your bones ache. I hadn't seen another car for hours. No streetlights, no signs of life, just me and the storm. I tried to convince myself I was fine, that the worst thing I had to worry about was running out of gas. But there was this itch at the back of my neck like something was watching me from the shadows. Then out of nowhere, I saw it, a battered old sign half buried in snow, Norfolk Hollow, 10 miles. My chest unclenched a little. A town meant people, warmth, maybe a diner where I could get a cup of bad coffee and wait for the storm to blow over. I pushed forward, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, following the road as it climbed higher into the hills. The snow only got worse, piling up on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. After what felt like an eternity, my headlights caught the edge of a clearing. Relief washed over me as I pulled closer, thinking I'd found the town. But as the trees gave way, I realized this wasn't Norfolk Hollow. It was something else. The clearing was small, almost claustrophobic, ringed by trees that seemed to press in like an audience. In the center were a handful of cabins, their roofs sagging under the weight of the snow. They looked ancient, like they'd been plucked from another century and dropped there to rot. The windows were dark, empty. There was no light, no movement, nothing to suggest anyone had lived there in years. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake. Something about the place felt off. It was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get in the woods with the rustle of leaves or the distant call of an owl. This was wrong quiet, like the whole world had stopped to hold its breath. But I didn't have much choice. My gas gauge was teetering on empty, and the storm wasn't letting up. I steered onto a narrow path that led into the clearing, the tires crunching over the snow. As I parked near the largest cabin, I left the headlights on, their dim glow barely pushing back the darkness. I grabbed my sleeping bag and flashlight, planning to camp out in the car. The cabins felt unwelcoming, like they didn't want me there. I wrapped myself in the sleeping bag, telling myself I'd leave at first light. Outside, the wind howled and the snow tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is the sound. It started faint, almost easy to ignore. A soft, rhythmic scraping like a branch dragging across wood. But it didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, and I realized it wasn't the wind. My stomach knotted as I peered through the frost-covered windshield. The largest cabin's door was open. A woman stepped into the clearing, her silhouette sharp and angular in the dim light of a lantern she carried. She was tall, draped in layers of dark cloth that billowed around her. In her hands, she dragged a sled piled with long, lumpy bundles wrapped in burlap. I couldn't look away, my breath fogging the glass, as I watched her haul the sled to the center of the clearing. She knelt in the snow, unwrapping the bundles with eerie precision. My stomach flipped when I saw what was inside. Bones, smooth, white, and polished. She arranged them in a circle, her hands moving like she was performing some ancient ritual. Then she began to chant. Her voice was low and guttural, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. The words didn't make sense, like they weren't meant for human ears. The storm seemed to hush around her, as if even the wind was afraid. Then she stopped. Her head snapped up, and she turned to face me. I froze. She couldn't have seen me, not through the snow and the darkness, but she raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed, not at the car, at me. Panic surged through me like ice water. My hands fumbled for the keys, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The engine sputtered to life and my headlights flared, lighting up the clearing in stark, blinding detail. The circle of bones was empty, and she wasn't alone anymore. The other cabin's doors were opening, one by one, spilling shadowy figures into the snow. Men and women, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their movements slow and deliberate. They carried more bundles, more bones. My stomach dropped as I realized they were forming a larger circle, this time around my car. I didn't think. I just acted. The tires spun wildly as I threw the car into reverse, the engine screaming in protest. The figures didn't move, but their heads turned as one, their black, empty eyes locking onto me. I didn't stop driving, not until I hit the main road, and even then, I didn't feel safe until the storm started to fade. I never found Norfolk Hollow on a map, and I never tried to. Whatever was out there, whatever I saw, I wasn't supposed to see it. So if you're ever caught in a snowstorm and see a clearing like that, just keep driving. Some places aren't meant for us. It's funny how life has this way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. One moment you're coasting through your days, convinced you've got a handle on everything. The next, the rug gets yanked out from under you, leaving you questioning who you are, what you've done, and whether you'll ever feel like yourself again. That's exactly what happened to me on a freezing January night back in 1996. It was during a snowstorm so fierce it felt like the world was being swallowed whole. I grew up in a little place called Ironwood. If you've never heard of it, don't worry. Most people haven't. It's tucked so far up north that winter starts sometime in October and doesn't really let go until May. The kind of cold we had there wasn't the bundle up in a scarf kind of cold. It was the kind that bit straight through your layers, clawing into your skin like it had a personal vendetta. Snow piled so high you could lose a car in it. There were days when the sky felt like it was pressing down on you, heavy and gray. Ironwood wasn't much to look at. A few rows of tired old houses, one diner, a gas station/convenience store, and a post office that was basically a shoebox with a roof. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone. At least, that's what I always thought. Growing up there, it felt like there wasn't a secret in town that could stay hidden for long. But that winter proved me wrong. Our school was the center of everything in Ironwood. It was a brick building that housed every grade from kindergarten to 12th. It doubled as a community center and even a town hall when needed. It was the place where life happened. I was 16 that year, right on the cusp of figuring out who I was and dreaming about life beyond the snow and the trees. My mom worked the early shift at the diner, leaving before sunrise and coming home smelling like coffee and fried eggs. My dad, who'd once been the best mechanic for miles, had slowed down a lot after a car accident left him with a bad leg. He spent most of his time in the garage, tinkering with old engines and muttering to himself. And then there was Coach Harper. If there was anyone who seemed larger than life in Ironwood, it was him. He'd been the town's golden boy, a wrestling champ who went to college on a full scholarship only to come back and coach basketball at the high school. He had this way about him, this easy confidence that made you want to work harder and be better. For a lot of us, he wasn't just a coach. He was the guy who made you believe in yourself when no one else did. That January day started like any other. The storm had been creeping in since morning, the sky growing darker and the wind picking up as the hours passed. By lunchtime, the snow was coming down so hard you could barely see across the parking lot. They let us out of school early, and most of the kids bolted for home, eager to beat the worst of it. But not me. I stayed behind in the gym, shooting hoops. There was something about the empty gym that felt comforting. The echo of the ball, the rhythm of it bouncing against the floor, the way the rest of the world seemed to disappear. Coach Harper was there, leaning against the bleachers like he always did. "You're stiff, Jonah." His voice cut through the stillness. "Relax. Let the shot come to you." He sauntered over, took the ball, and sank a perfect shot from the three-point line. See, simple. We ended up talking for a while, just the two of us in that quiet gym. He told me about his dreams of going pro, about the injury that derailed his plans, and how coaching had become his way of staying close to the game. I remember hanging on every word. I soaked up his advice like a sponge. By the time the janitor came in to lock up, the storm outside was a full-blown blizzard. The windows rattled in their frames, and the snow whipped past in furious gusts. "Let me give you a ride," Harper offered as I zipped up my coat. No sense walking in this mess. I didn't think twice about it. I mean, why would I? He was Coach Harper, for crying out loud. The ride started out fine. The heater in his old truck hummed, and the wipers struggled to keep up with the snow. The radio played softly. Some old country tune blended into the background. Halfway home, though, his pager went off. I still remember the sound. A sharp, piercing beep shattered the cozy silence of the cab. Harper glanced at it, frowning. "Mind if we make a quick stop?" he asked. His tone was casual. "Won't take long." "Sure," I said without thinking. We turned off the main road onto a narrow, snow-covered track that led to the old grain silo on the edge of town. The silo had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. A rusted relic of a time when ironwood had dreams bigger than its reality. It loomed out of the snow like something from a horror movie. Its metal sides were streaked with rust, and its roof sagged under the weight of years. Harper parked a few yards away and told me to wait in the truck. But I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else. Some instinct I didn't even understand at the time. I climbed out of the cab. The wind hit me like a slap in the face. I trudged toward the silo. That's when I saw her, Jessie Malone. Quiet, shy Jessie, who always sat 2 rows behind me in English. She stumbled out of the silo. Her coat was hanging open, and her hair a wild mess. Her face was pale, almost gray, and she moved like she was drunk or worse. A moment later, Harper appeared behind her. His hand gripped her arm as he spoke to her in a low, hurried voice. Jessie jerked her arm free and staggered toward the truck. Harper's voice snapped through the storm, sharp and commanding. "Get back here, Jessie." She froze. Her shoulders hunched like a scolded child. Then she turned, and for just a second, her eyes met mine. Even through the snow and the dim light, I could see the fear in them, raw and unfiltered. She shook her head, just a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. Then she climbed into the truck. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the truck's taillights disappeared into the swirling snow. My mind raced. 1,000 questions collided with no answers in sight. By the time I made it home, 3 miles of trudging through knee-deep drifts, I felt like I was in a fog, disconnected from reality. The next week passed in a blur. Jessie came to school, but she was different. Her smile was gone, replaced by a hollow, distant look. I wanted to ask her about that night, to tell her I'd seen something. But every time I tried, the words got stuck in my throat. And then, 2 days later, she disappeared. Ironwood went into a frenzy. Search parties combed the woods and the frozen river. Their flashlights cut through the dark. People whispered theories. She'd run away, been kidnapped, fallen through the ice. Harper was everywhere. He led searches, comforted her parents. His face was the picture of concern. I watched him from a distance. The weight of what I'd seen pressed on me like a physical thing. 6 months later, they found her. Jessie's body was buried in a shallow grave near the silo. The whole town grieved. Candlelight vigils were held. Prayers were said. And Harper, he gave a speech at her memorial. His voice was thick with emotion. His eyes glistened with tears. I sat in the back, unable to look at him. The day I turned 18, I left Ironwood for good, but the guilt came with me. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape it. Sometimes in my dreams, I see Jessie's face. Those wide, frightened eyes and that tiny shake of her head. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars never fade. Some storms, no matter how far you run, never truly pass. Don't forget to check out these videos. Thanks for watching.